What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you in the evening hours of Wednesday, June 26, 2024. And we're breaking down on the show tonight a Cardinals split of the doubleheader against the Atlanta Braves on Wednesday. Cardinals lose the early game of the day 6-2 to Atlanta. Did not get the start that they were looking for from Kyle Gibson. And the nightcap was a much better story for the Cardinals as the bullpen game, as it were, turned into 6 solid scoreless innings by Matthew Liberatore, who took the ball. This time he at least had like a day of notice compared to what it was the situation last Wednesday when he had about 15 minutes of notice before making the start against the Marlins. A week later, he was informed the night before after the Cardinals had the rainout on Tuesday that he would be the starter for the nightcap Wednesday, and boy, oh boy, was he excellent. We'll talk about the Cardinals split today on the show, and highlighting in particular Game 2, because as much as it might be fun to play the doom and gloom game, the Cardinals ended up bouncing back, so we're going to focus on the game that I actually covered, the night game, Liberatore start. That afternoon game does not work very well for me to be able to get back home for my radio show, doing the big show on KTGR weekdays from 4 to 6. So we'll talk about that game, but then we'll spend more time and play maybe a little audio from post-game as Oli Marmol was impressed by Matthew Liberatore, and so was anybody at Busch Stadium who got to witness the outing. 8 strikeouts for Liberatore over 6 shutout innings, and that came basically out of nowhere because I think coming into the game, if you had told me he goes 4 or 5 scoreless innings, I would say the Cardinals would have been over the moon about that. The fact that he gets through 6 and goes well beyond what any prescribed pitch count could have been for this day was very, very impressive. And I don't know what kinds of questions it may create about Matthew Liberatore's role moving forward and what the Cardinals want to do with him, but certainly an outing like that is one that you can't necessarily ignore as you're crafting plans as a team. So let me know in the comments below. I'll ask this off the top. What do you think the Cardinals should do about Libby after this great outing that he had on Wednesday? Because before today, our consensus opinion was basically, probably should leave him in the bullpen where he's had the most success this year, rather than try to force the starter thing again when it just hasn't really panned out in recent weeks and months and even years, you could make the case. But is a start like this one that gets you back on the bandwagon to maybe see Matthew Liberatore in a starting role? Because if he can go 6 innings shutout with 8 Ks and do something even close to that regularly, well, that's better than a number 5 starter. You're talking about a midline to potentially frontline starter if Liberatore could produce that way. Now, we have seen it over and over again in instances where he has not looked like that in a starter's role, but I would also submit it's the same conversation that I had after the last time the Cardinals basically removed Liberatore out of the rotation earlier this year. It was the fact that they really never gave him a level best chance to succeed in that role. Given that he was thrusted straight from the bullpen into the rotation, they built him up on the fly, and people would criticize, and I still get these comments from people saying, well, Matthew Liberatore just can't go deep into games. Like, he's always had issues doing that. It's like, okay, but if you're talking about just this year, he was literally a relief pitcher, built up as a relief pitcher, and then they said, hey, go start. And so you can't possibly hold it against him that he wasn't going deep into games. That's just the way it works when you're not built up to do the role. So I feel like the Cardinals, in thrusting him into that role earlier in the season, it stood to reason that you weren't going to get the best out of him in that spot until such time that he was able to stretch out and build back up. But then that kind of happened. Then he goes back into the bullpen. Then he's pitching as a reliever. And suddenly last Wednesday, Kyle Gibson was not able to make his start. And so on 0 days rest, they said, hey, Libby, it's going to be you. And lo and behold, he went out there and gave up a couple of home runs to begin, but then shut things down for 3 2/3 innings. It's like, okay, maybe he's capable of doing this on the fly and building him back up. While it would be a nice idea, it's not maybe a necessity. But, well, that's probably a one-off, right? Because they're not really going to need him as a starter again. That was a special occasion, an emergency situation because of Gibson's injury. Well, now a week later, you have a rain out on Tuesday, and it necessitates a bullpen game, which evidently they were going to have one anyway. Was originally planned for Friday to be a bullpen game. I don't really understand that. I guess they were trying to bake in an extra day of rest for everybody in the rotation. This tweet from Jeff Jones, and he was covering the entire doubleheader today. I didn't cover the first game, but he shared the news that the Cardinals will start Miles Michaelis tomorrow, which is Thursday, so that'll be the guy for tomorrow. Andre Palante on Friday. Marmol said they were planning for a bullpen game on Friday to buy an extra rest day for the rotation, but with the doubleheader, it slid up to today. So evidently this was already going to be a thing that they would go with a bullpen game, but with Matthew Liberatore, he hasn't pitched since the previous Wednesday in which he made that spot start in an emergency, so it made all the sense in the world for him to be the guy today. Yes, you could have brought up somebody from AAA as the 27th man. I understand it. The Cardinals to this point have obviously been pretty reluctant to do that in the first place, whether it's guys that have been on the 40-man roster, like they brought Kloffenstein up, but that was for one special inning at Rickwood Field, never to be heard from again. No, hopefully he gets his next chance to actually pitch in a big league stadium, but for Kloffenstein, like that was a special occasion. He wasn't trusted. They didn't entrust him with a start, right? That was an inning on a day the bullpen was really, really beleaguered, and they needed somebody to be able to give him an inning or two, and so they had him available for that. Sim Robertson, for a time we thought maybe he would be a guy. He is on the 40-man. Still haven't seen him. I don't believe Gordon Graceffo is yet on the 40-man, but at some point he'll have to be added to the list if they want to retain him through the Rule 5 process. But they could have gone with him today. I believe he would have been on turn to be able to start, and they didn't end up choosing to recall him for the opportunity as the 27th man. They go with Chris Roycroft as the 27th man, and he was only available then for Game 2, but you knew he would probably get into the game for an inning or two behind Liberator, depending on how far into the game Libby could go. But the fact that they say, hey, Libby, he's on a good amount of rest because he pitched the previous Wednesday, he's going to pitch this Wednesday, and we'll see how far he can go. The fact that he ended up going 6 innings was a huge revelation for the Cardinals. I don't know what they do about it, but dang it, it was exciting to watch. 6 innings, 2 hits allowed, 8 strikeouts, allowing only 1 walk, and goose eggs across the board for Matthew Liberatore as he shut down the Atlanta Braves and ends up getting the win as the Cardinals win this one 4-1 in Game 2. Let's go ahead and recap a little bit of Game 1, and then I will get back into what I primarily would like to discuss, which is Game 2. But 2 games did happen today, so let's talk about what happened in the first one. Cardinals lose it 6-2. Kyle Gibson was not good. It was just one of those days for him. I don't know if it's a product of the weird schedule where last week he comes up with the back issue right before his start and doesn't take the ball, and then he's supposed to pitch on Tuesday, but you have the delay and the rain out. I don't know how deep into his prep on Tuesday he was able to get before you kind of realize, yeah, this game isn't going to be played. But it was just kind of a wonky set of circumstances and has been over the past week for Kyle Gibson. It's not an excuse, but I just wonder if that plays into it at all. He said he felt fine physically, so it's just one of those outings. But he had 5 walks. He just did not have the command that you're typically used to seeing from him. All 4 runs that he allowed over his truncated 4-inning outing occurred in the second inning for the Atlanta Braves, but just didn't have his command throughout the start. And on a day where you're going doubleheader, you really hate to think that the guy that was supposed to go long for you, give you some length, ends up only going 4 innings. Kyle Leahy throws 3 innings of relief that the Cardinals really needed just to kind of get through the game. The fact that he gives up the home run is sort of where the game ended, and that the hopes for the Cardinals ended in Game 1 to be able to maybe find a way to win this thing in come-from-behind fashion. But honestly, I felt like things ended in the bottom of the 5th. It was that 1-inning frame between the bottom of the 5th and the top of the 6th where the hopes kind of died. Brendan Donovan had a good swing that he put on a ball with the bases loaded and didn't get anything to show for it. It was like 105 off the bat, but right to the outfielder, and that was all she wrote. The Cardinals were bases loaded, nobody out in the bottom of the 5th inning, and all they got out of it was 1 run on a sacrifice fly. So that was kind of the point where you go, all right, this kind of feels like a mail-it-in sort of game, and the offense basically did that down the stretch. They only had 4 hits in the game. They had 6 walks. You'd think you'd be able to capitalize on some of that, but they were unable to do so. Reynaldo Lopez has turned himself into a pretty nice option for the Braves in their rotation. He went 5 innings, gave up 2 runs, 4 walks, and the Cardinals just weren't able to capitalize. But he's been beating other teams this year. It's not an example of a AAA guy gets called up. That was Game 2 tonight. Reynaldo Lopez has been good all year. He's got a 1.7 ERA. It's just, you got beat. You'd like to think that the Cardinals wouldn't mail it in because of an early deficit, but if you look at the box score, you kind of go, okay, felt like one where they maybe mailed it in a little bit. They got down 4-0 early. They came up with some opportunities, but they didn't really cash in with the urgency that you need in those spots, and so they lose it 6-2. The only other notable thing that happened from this one was Giovanny Gallegos finally appearing in a game after his activation from the injured list. He, through one inning, did not allow a hit, did not allow a run, and yet it was borderline unwatchable as far as the inning from Gallegos. He walked a guy, and he had to throw 26 pitches to get through. It seemed like every count was run full. Every count was going deep. He did not look particularly sharp. Got away with it for that 8th inning. And then maybe the story of the first game that goes unnoticed, but if you're reading between the lines on Oli Marmol's postgame, you recognize it. I don't think he was particularly happy with Gio after that first game. And here's what I mean. I'm going to play the audio for you. This will come courtesy of Bally Sports Midwest because, as I mentioned, I was not covering that first game of the day. But listen to this question that Oli gets asked about Giovanny Gallegos and let me know what you think of his answer.
Gio hit some 93s. What did you see from him there in that inning?
Yeah, it was good to see him get through that inning. Felt lightheaded. He was going to go out for the second inning in order to get us through that game and save King, who can give us multiples for the following game. So we'll rethink that here in a minute. But
and that's really the only part you need to hear. He basically said, yep, Gio was supposed to go out for that second inning. Could have used him in the 9th inning there. He's a low-leverage guy right now coming out of the injured list stint. Would have been nice to have had him just go ahead and throw that 9th inning for us, eat the inning so that we didn't have to burn John King, who would have been real useful in Game 2. Would like to have had him for Game 2 for multiples when Liberatore, which again, at the time, didn't know that Libby was about to shove for 6. But as a manager, you're planning going into Game 2 thinking, I'd love to have John King available as another lefty to give me maybe a couple of innings if Libby is only able to go 3 or 4, which on the pitch count that they had planned for him would not have been crazy unreasonable to have happened. So Oli Marmol says he is feeling lightheaded. Yeah, we're going to send him back out for the second inning there, but he got lightheaded or something, and so we didn't, and now we have to rethink. Yep, would have been nice to have King, but had to use him, had to burn him. I mean, that was just, I don't know. That's a little bit... a little spicy, maybe. You know, it's not like he said anything wrong, but I think he told the truth. Like, yeah, the role of a guy who's not entering today as a leverage man in your bullpen, which Gio's not right now because he just came off the injured list and this was the first time you used him, and it was a great spot. And the one thing that you can take away from the first game being a loss by 4 runs is that it's the ideal Giovanny Gallegos spot to get him back into the mix and see what it looks like. Didn't look that good. Didn't look great, but that was the spot that you wanted to get a chance to measure and find some data points on what it's looking like out of his hand. And the fact that they basically just wanted to throw him out there for the second inning so he could eat it up, soak up the 9th, and find a way to keep John King available and fresh for Game 2. But he was lightheaded. So, I don't know. That is what it is. And we'll see as far as, Gio moving forward is concerned. But what I saw today from Giovanny Gallegos versus what I saw today from Chris Roycroft, I know which guy that I would rather have in leverage situations in my bullpen. And it's not Gio at this point. So my assumption is that Roycroft will go back to Memphis tomorrow because he was the 27th man today and is not technically, on the roster beyond that unless they make a move to extend his stay. But I don't know that they're gonna punt Gio off the bridge, so to speak, after a scoreless outing. Like I said, though, it was scoreless, but it wasn't sharp. And it also, there had to be some frustration there that he was not able/willing to take the second inning of that first game to just mop it up. And it's kind of telling, too, that Gallegos has gone from, primary 8th inning man to he throws 26 pitches in the 8th, and they're like, you ready for one more? And he's like, not really. But if he would have gone that 9th and let's say throws 15 pitches, I mean, that's 41 pitches. That knocks him out of usage for at least a couple of days, you'd have to think, under normal circumstances. So anyway, that was kind of interesting that they wanted to bring him back out for the 9th, and he said, lightheaded, can't do it. So that's really all I've got for you from Game 1. Cardinal offense, 4 hits. They just didn't get enough done offensively. And that spot in the not the 8th, but the 5th, had Donovan hit his line drive instead of directly to the center fielder, if he hits it into the gap, Cardinals take the lead or at least tie the game. And it's a whole different conversation there about what happens and what transpires in game one. But doesn't go that way, and then Leahy gives up a home run. Cardinal relievers have done, and even starters have done a much better job of keeping the ball in the yard recently, but that was a case where they were not able to do so. Jared Kelenic hits one. It's a 2-run shot off of Leahy. He had a crazy day. I mean, they just couldn't get Kelenic out. Somehow Liberatore gave up a couple of hits to him as well in the lefty-lefty matchup, which is a little bit ironic because typically that's where Libby has really bore down. And we'll talk more about Libby and the splits and everything that transpired in game two, because there was a moment in the sixth inning where I thought for sure this is where Libby's night comes to an end, but Oli Marmol stayed in the dugout. He let him persist and go after Ozzie Albies, despite the fact that the data said, nope, that's not the matchup you want, Cardinals. Don't do it. So for those who have maybe accused Oli Marmol in the past of managing with the iPad or managing to whatever the data says, the analytics, and not having a feel for the game, which I think is not necessarily a fair criticism, but at times like he has definitely been a little more rigid to the book of what the analytics would dictate, or what just what the matchups would dictate in many cases. I don't really mean to use that as a pejorative. I think it's honestly a good way most of the time to approach things. However, there's room for, in this beautiful game of baseball, having a feel for the moment, and I think Oli Marmol did an excellent job of that in letting Libby face Ozzie Albies. So we'll get into that here in just a minute, but just wrapping up our thoughts on game one. Yeah, you'd like to see the offense do a little bit more, but I think it was a combination of Gibby giving it up early, and you're feeling that little pressure from, we're playing from behind. We've got 2 games to play today. It just might not be our game. It just might not be our moment. And then when the 5th inning didn't go their way, and then the 6th inning, Zach Short, I think, was the 9 batter for the Braves in game one. He dinks one, with a real low exit velo, just dinks it past Kyle Leahy. He ends up scoring on the Kelenic homer that makes it a 2-run shot. And it's just like, all right, this game's done. The top of the 6th, the game was done. You could have stopped right there. Cardinals could have waved that white flag and saved the bullpen and just call it, because it just didn't feel like they were going to really make their way back in that game, and they didn't. So that's how game one played out. But man, game two, that was a lot more fun for the Cardinals. Matthew Liberatore comes in, and we were hearing like 60, 65 pitches as far as his pitch count limit before the game, and I don't know where that comes from. I heard it on the radio broadcast coming in, but again, I was not there, did not cover the first game nor the post game of the first game, which kind of doubles as the pregame of the second game. I wasn't there. So I don't know what was said as far as Liberatore and the planned pitch count before the game. Afterwards, though, Oli Marmol said they were looking at like 70 to 75 pitches is about what their thought was as a coaching staff coming in for Libby. And obviously he's at 71 pitches after 5. And I'm looking out to the bullpen, and I don't see anybody really warming up. I'm like, he's getting the 6th inning. He's at least coming out for the beginning of it. And as Oli Marmol said after the game, that was sort of their thought. You had the number 9 batter, Luke Williams, who was the Braves' 27th man for the nightcap. They started him at shortstop, and he is a right-handed batter, but no batting average at the big league level, just maybe not as much of a threat to where they were like, hey, Libby's dealing, let's give him the 9-hole. And then you turn things over to Jared Kelenic, who, although he had gotten 2 hits off of Liberatore to that point in the game, that's the matchup that you would favor for Libby, given his splits over the course of his career, and especially with this season. The splits are just totally drastic coming into the start of play on Wednesday. Here's Matthew Liberatore's splits for the season in terms of platoon splits. He's faced left-handed batters for 54 plate appearances and has allowed a 378 OPS. Lefties hitting 135 against Matthew Liberatore. Really good numbers. He's been sharp against lefties. A 5.5 strikeout to walk ratio. Just everything about it has been better against lefties. 100 plate appearances entering Wednesday against right-handed batters for Libby. Righties are hitting 310 against him with a 394 on-base percentage and a 548 slug. That's an OPS of 942. That is an MVP candidate coming to the dish every time a righty takes on Matthew Liberatore this season. 942 OPS. Just awful numbers against righties. And that's part of what made it difficult to have him be viable as a starter. right? Like as a reliever, as Oli mentioned post-game, you're able to sort of hide him from those opportunities and not leave him overexposed. You can set him into a spot in the game where even with 3-batter minimum, you can go lefty, lefty, righty. If it's a lefty, righty, lefty, you can set him up for those chances where he's probably only having to face one righty out of 3 is generally going to be the goal when Libby comes into games because he's got those drastic splits. However, as a starter, as Ollie alluded to, you can't hide from it. There isn't that option to be able to tailor-made and pick your spots on what he gets to be exposed to. So you're just going out there pitching. And I believe the numbers for righties against Liberatore tonight was 0 for 14. I'm just trusting that from John Denton because he said it to Ollie after the game, and it sounds about right. I know they went 0 for because Libby only allowed 2 hits in this game, and both of them were Jared Kelenic, which after the fact, Liberatore said, of all people. Not because he's saying, oh, Kelenic sucks. No, Kelenic was great all day for the Braves in both games as their leadoff man. Still did not understand the trade that sent him from the Mariners to the Braves, but that's for another day. But Libby's point in saying of all people was he knows the splits. He knows he's been dominant against lefties this year and just has not been good against righties. So you kind of figure that you're going to be able to get that guy and then maybe struggle against some of the beefy righties in the middle of this Braves lineup, like Marcell Ozuna you would figure would be an absolutely miserable matchup for Matthew Liberatore. And Austin Riley, you would think would be an awful matchup as well. A good right-handed bat was not an issue. Was not an issue for Matthew Liberatore today, facing against those guys. He really found his rhythm, found his groove. He was nasty. They had said on the stadium gun, I think at 1.98 with one of his fastballs. I didn't see that looking at StatCast. I saw 96.7 was the hottest he got in terms of pitch velocity. I unless he did it later on, maybe, but he was kind of declining back down toward 93 or so in the later innings, which is understandable for a guy who's not built up, didn't maintain that 95, 96 the whole night. Okay, I'm not going to hold that against him when he did pitch into the 6th and complete the 6th, but 96.7, he was getting it up there as a starter, and that's really what the Cardinals have always wanted to see from him is, hey, that velo that you can put together in the bullpen, just do that at the beginning of your start and go as long as you can, give as much as you've got, and then we'll take you out when it's time. You don't have to toggle your velo as a starter. And for him, for some guys, you might have to try to save a little bit because, you know that you're going to go 3 times through the lineup or whatever the case might be. But for Liberatore, it's just been very clear over the course of time that he has one mentality in the bullpen, and then when he goes to start, it's like another guy comes out and he's a little tentative. He's a little less confident. And that was just not the case tonight. Liberatore had all the confidence that you could possibly hope to see from a pitcher, and he sustained it for 6 innings. And it was crazy to see 71 pitches. Again, I don't know what the pregame count was, if it was 60, 65. I heard that on the radio. He had 71 through 5 innings. Comes out for the 6th the way that you would expect it to be. I think I started telling this story a little bit earlier, but got sidetracked, as I also often get to do. But here's the way it played out. Nobody was warming up until the Cardinals were retired in the bottom of the 5th. And then at that moment, Chris Roycroft immediately hopped up to start warming up as Libby comes out to warm up for the 6th. And I mentioned the hitters that it was, Luke Williams, and then Kelenic, the lefty at the top. The splits for Libby, brutal. We read them off. We're going to find a way to get him through that Luke Williams character and then Kelenic. And then it's Ozzie Albies, who's a switch batter. He's likely the spot for Chris Roycroft to come into the game. Even if Libby gets the first 2 guys out, that's okay. He's going to end with a 5 2/3 on his line, and that's just the way that it makes sense to do it. Libby strikes out Luke Williams, the righty. Libby strikes out Kelenic, the lefty. Roycroft is ready to pitch. And yet, here comes Ozzie Albies, and Matthew Liberatore is still on the mound, and Oli Marmol is still in the dugout. He doesn't come out to make the move. Albies, who has a 900 OPS against lefties this year, because he's the switch hitter, so from the right side, he's a 900 OPS. Against righties, if you switch him around, if you force Albies from the left side of the plate by bringing in a right-handed reliever. His OPS is 649 against right-handed pitchers from the left side of the plate this season. It is night and day. Not quite as night and day as the significantly drastic splits that Libby himself has against righties versus lefties. Talked about the 942 OPS versus, it's like he's hitting 135. They're hitting 135 against him, lefties, with a 378 OPS. Just extreme splits. And then Albies has extreme splits. Not as crazy as Libby's, but they're big time. So both ends of this, the arrow, the giant neon arrow, is pointing toward pitching change. Roycroft comes in to face the righty, probably picks up the 7th inning as well. That would be the goal for him, who's a little more built up for multi-inning relief appearances. That would have been the idea. But Oli Marmol lets Matthew Liberatore face Ozzie Albies, and he gets him. Curveball, off the plate, called strike 3. Pretty well located, and he got rewarded for it with the call. Pedro Pages is a hell of a catcher behind the plate. Frames the pitch right, dandy, and gets the call. Albies was pissed, but didn't matter. Libby was walking to the dugout. He was done with 6 innings, shutout, 85 pitches, more than anybody would have prescribed for him. And evidently in the dugout afterward, he was lobbying to try to stay in the game. He said, I got one more in me. And Ollie said, thank you for your service. You've done enough. But the fact that he was still feeling like I had gas left in the tank, that is the version they have wanted to see from Matthew Liberatore for several years now. And I think you saw it one time last August in Tampa, and that was the time. And other than that, it just has not been consistent when you see him in a starter's role. But this is what it was, man. This was pinnacle of Matt Liberatore and what he's capable of doing. And as much as Andre Pallante is a gamer, and I like his grit, I like his want to, I think the upside for Libby is probably higher than what it is for Pallante. But the consistency of Pallante, I think, has been a little bit closer to what you need. Whereas, like, whatever Pallante's best is, he's giving you that 70% of the time, 75% of the time, whatever it is. Whatever Libby's best is, and I think we saw as an example his best tonight, whatever his best is in the rotation, you're only getting that maybe 10 to 15 to 20% of the time. The consistency has not been there. But when you see a night like this, that is like, that you can't replicate that. They don't have that in their rotation outside of Sonny Gray. That type of stuff and upside and just bulldog mojo, they don't have that in a person not named Sonny Gray on this team. Maybe not in this organization. You're hopeful for guys like Tink Hence, if you can get him healthy. Cooper Jerpy had another big night at Springfield. 5 no-hit innings, I believe it was. Got up to 78 pitches. Quinn Matthews, by the way, getting promoted to Springfield. A quick riser in the org. Hopefully some of those guys pan out to be dudes, but like the upside that was flashed, we got a glimpse of it again from Libby on Wednesday night. That is a rarity in this organization. And to me, it's enough to say, dude, come on, he gets another start. I don't care how you have to figure it out. I don't care what needs to happen. Heck, you wanted to give the extra day to your starters? Say F it. We'll do it again. Leading into the All-Star break, we'll do it again. This is not the type of team to do a 6-man rotation with. I understand that because you're basically half the time this season going, do they even have 3? Do they even have 4? You kind of settled in with the 3 when Michaelis has really turned things around. And though Gibby had a rough one today, he's been pretty much nails for you. And you know what Sonny Gray can do. So those are 3. Lance Lynn was rough for a little while, but he's starting to turn the corner perhaps. 2 straight starts with no walks, and he went 6 2/3. Gave up 1 run against the Braves in this series. So you're feeling better about him. And then Pallante, it's like, look, he gave up 5 runs at Rickwood, but it was only 3 when he left the game, and then Kittredge served up a couple more that were inherited runners. He's not been as sharp as he had been at the beginning of the year. He came in tonight, ended up getting charged with a run when Jojo Romero, who also has not been as sharp, was not able to keep the inherited runner from scoring as he tried to cap off the 8th inning. The triumvirate is in a bit of a state of disarray right now. Even Helsley, to an extent, which he allowed a couple of base runners tonight, but got through it and had a clean-ish 9th, scoreless 9th, as it were, to save his 28th consecutive. But anyway, my point was talking Palante, that Kittredge gave up or allowed some of those inherited runners that were charged to Palante to score back at Rickwood on Thursday. So the numbers didn't look as good for Palante, but he pitched pretty well. He competed out there. I wouldn't have a problem with it if the Cardinals are looking to try to keep their guys fresh. I would go one more round with 6. I would say that's fine. We're going to give everybody another extra day just to make sure, like, if this rotation, and we've talked a lot about how important it is for them to keep these guys healthy, keep them out there, make sure that they have the tools with which to be durable. Look, it's not a normal thing, but it's almost like, yeah, I would tell Libby he's starting 6 days from now because that's just how good he was tonight, that it almost would feel like a disservice to the guy to take him and put him back into the bullpen when that could be what you're getting every 5 or 6 days from a spot in your rotation. That would be huge, man, to have that version of Libby. He's not going to be a Cy Young candidate every time he goes out there and pitches, but it's different. It's different when he turns it on, and I would try to take that and bottle it and sell it. I'm not trying to bottle it up and stash it on the shelf to be used in low-leverage lefty relief. You know, I'm giving Libby another shot. Life's too short to potentially have a guy like that able to make starts for your organization, and you don't take advantage of it and allow him to try after a great one like tonight. Life's too short. The lifespan of a baseball player, the career span is too short to be wasting time if Liberatore might be able to, like, if something has clicked for him, maybe it hasn't, and maybe 5-6 days from now you find that out and he stinks up the joint, but he's getting the chance to stink up the joint for me, for my team. If I'm managing, if I'm calling the shots, he's starting 6 days from this one because you don't have to displace Palante over it. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, to me, Libby's going to get another look. Line it up however you want, but he's starting for me. I would absolutely make that decision based off of, a small sample of one game, but it was a special sample. And if it doesn't pan out, again, life may be too short to have a guy like that waiting in the wings and not get the most out of him. But a baseball season is also long. And for this Cardinals team now that they've gotten some wins under their belt and they're a few games above 500, this season is long enough that you can afford it. You can afford to try it out. And if nothing else, if it doesn't go well, you go, okay, we tried it again. And I get it. We're tired of the ping pong when it comes to Liberatore because he's a starter, he isn't, he's a starter, he isn't. But this was not the most ideal of circumstances to have him start on 0 days rest a week ago and then show a little moxie and being able to get through some early trouble. And then a week later, he's told the night before you're starting again and does what he does. He was brilliant and basically said post-game, it doesn't matter to me. Like, I don't care. I guess 1 day of notice is better than 10 minutes of notice, but whatever. Like, he just wants the ball. He says all the right things. But finally, he did all the right things on the mound as a starter, right? He has a starter's mentality. He talked about, I'm a starter. I've been starting for 15 years. It's not that much to take me back into the role and say, go throw 85 pitches. Like, even though he's not, quote unquote, built up for that, the way he views it as he's a starter at heart. And so this was nothing to just get back up on the bike and go do it. And when he was sharp, obviously it makes it a little bit easier to get deep. But that's like, you're already trying to rest and recuperate and allow these other starters to make it through the season. If you've got a hot hand right now, you might as well feed him another opportunity, and that's just going to make sure that those other guys are even all the more rested, and then they'll go into an all-star break where they'll get even more rest. Like, it makes perfect sense to me. Libby would be starting, whether it's 5 days from now or 6 days from now. I would give him another look based on tonight alone, and then that kind of plays into this conversation about the way that Oli has handled pitchers to this point in terms of guys in the rotation. We've talked about whether he's got quick hooks on Sonny Gray because he takes him out after 7 innings and 80 pitches. Whether Sonny could have continued maybe for an extra out the game that he pitched into the 8th but was pulled for Romero on still a pretty manageable pitch count. Well, this was a question that was asked this morning, and I'm reading this from Jeff Jones's Twitter account. He said it was asked this morning if the reshuffling of the rotation and the seemingly early hooks on starters are all related to a broader maintenance strategy, and they are. Here's his full answer, which is worth reading for context. And here's the quote that Jeff typed out. Quote, "It is. I know this game you can question just about anything. That has been a big part of this. If you look at our depth, it's not our strength at the moment, right? That's been talked about enough. So making sure that we stay healthy has got to be an emphasis. And how do you do that? You monitor workload. So yeah, pulling somebody at 88, can they get to 100? Yeah, you can redline them all day long. Careful. To some laughter. He even put in laughs after that. You just kind of have to think bigger picture of what you have and what you worst case scenario looks like and what's the best way of getting there. It's by overusing these guys. That would be the worst case scenario, right? If you overuse them and then you don't have them, and then you look at your starting depth and go, well, crap. And like, again, this was a quote given before Liberatore looked like Cy Young for 6 innings. But you lose any one of those guys, a Michaelis, a Lynn, maybe not Lynn, but even Lynn at this point, who gave you a really good start on Monday, you lose Sonny Gray, you lose Gibson. You're like, all right, you're dipping back into what that looks like in terms of the depth. And Palante is already kind of the first line of defense because he's up here already, pitching in your rotation. Liberatore, although he's up here in your bullpen, he's kind of the next line of defense. But then you lose guys beyond that. Like, imagine losing Sonny Gray from this rotation. What in the heck are they doing at that point? It's clear that they have not been confident in anybody that they would look to call up from AAA. So it gets to be a little bit dicey at that point, no? So for as much as there has been that frustration of like, oh, he's pulling Sonny Gray too early. And I talked about this a couple of days ago on Sonny's start, how it's like, look, you go 7 2/3, and then you go 7. I don't care what your pitch counts were. You've done your job to preserve the bullpen. You've done enough at that point. And that's kind of how they've looked at it with Sonny Gray. And it's part of an intentional strategy, as was outlined in some pretty specific terms in the quote that I read there from Oli, which was apparently delivered before Game 1 this morning. I just don't think they have the faith in their depth, and that's, that was right there in black and white that Oli said, look, our depth is not a strength. But now if Libby is part of that depth, how do you feel about maybe giving him another look? That is going to be a question that they're going to have to try to tackle. They never want to be too reactionary to any one thing. And if anything, the Cardinals as an organization, decision-making wise, are typically very slow to react and slow to change and slow to do anything different than the status quo. But I feel like Wednesday night was an earth-shattering type of moment for Liberatore, where it's like, all right, you can't pretend you didn't see that and that he's just going to go back to the bullpen. Like, that would be kind of ludicrous to me. You may not love the depth, and that's why Oli has been careful with the starters, and I think to an extent that's right. But Liberatore can also maybe just break the glass ceiling. He can bust his way back in and say, hey, you got to consider me. I'm going to pitch like this. You have to consider me. And I think they should, because like I said, I think his upside, again, understand what I'm saying and not what I'm not saying. Liberatore at his best, I think, is better than Palante. I think is better than Lynn. It might even be better than Michaelis. I'm talking about his best, his cream of the crop. Michaelis, when he's at his best, can be really fun to watch. He's very efficient, throws strikes, but he's usually still letting the defense behind him carry the load. Liberatore can K8 in 6, like he just showed. Upside-wise, it may just be Sonny Gray that I would say has higher individual upside in a game than what we saw from Liberatore tonight. Can Liberatore do it again? I don't know. Like I said, Libby, you get the best version of Libby as a starter maybe 20% of the time. Rather than when it's Kyle Gibson, his upside might not be as high. His elite tier, tippy top. But the start you got today from Gibson is probably one of the worst you'll see from him all year. He had that one. He had the Marlins one back in early April. And maybe one other that was kind of so-so. Other than that, though, Gibby has been consistency, nails. He's his best self 70 to 80% of the time, if not more. That's where the differences come in and how Liberatore is viewed or isn't viewed as a starter by this organization. But when he just had that one, I'm saying give him another look. Let me know, Cardinals fans, what you think. If Libby deserves his next look in the rotation. It kind of happened on the fly that he wasn't really built up entirely, but he just threw 85 really high-quality pitches, and then comes in for that Albie spot. It was just so impressive to see, Oli Marmol give it to him. And like I've said, I think if you're up 2-0, it makes it a little bit easier because a home run, he could take you 700 feet. But you're still not losing the game. You still have the lead. So that's maybe one of the reasons that Oli felt compelled to give Libby that spot. And he gets the strikeout, he gets the call, but that who cares how he came up with it? He struck out the side in the 6th on a day where I kind of thought, hey, you go 4 innings and give him 4 good ones, that'll be enough. The bullpen can come in behind you after that. But no, he gave him 6, not just good ones, but excellent ones. Very impressive stuff from Matthew Liberatore tonight. Does it change how the Cardinals feel about him moving forward, and should it? I've said my piece on it. You let me know. I don't think there's a definitive right or wrong answer, so I'm excited to read these comments tonight. Offensively, that's really all there is to say and wrap up Game 2 and the podcast. Burleson continues to just be a dog. 2 for 4, 2 doubles, couple of RBIs, scoring on the double that he hit in the 3rd inning. He's just been fantastic. OPS is up to 799. He's the one Cardinal other than Contreras who has a chance to be above 800 as an OPS. Contreras is down to 887. Didn't look very good today in general, but especially Game 2, 0 for 4 with 2 Ks. He's going to come back down to earth a little bit, I think, but hopefully it's not long before he finds himself. But like Burleson's the hottest hitter on the team right now. Maybe Brendan Donovan would have a case for that. Man, I traded for him in fantasy like the very week that he started to really turn it on, and that makes me happy. Donovan, 2 for 4, had an RBI today. The offense as a whole didn't do a ton in this game. They had 8 hits, reached base via walk once. That was Gorman, who was 0 for 2 with 2 Ks, but also had himself a walk. But what they were able to do in the bottom of the 8th inning is what I want to highlight before we get out of here. Because Ryan Helsley's been a little shaky recently. Again, he's 28 in a row on saves, but it's not always been a very direct path to get there. Circuitous at times for Helsley in these recent opportunities. I just think it's fastball command. I think he was tipping. Did they figure that out? What's going on now if the tipping isn't a problem anymore? It was the Cubs series at Busch that the tipping was really a thing, and that's been several weeks since that happened. But it seems like the fastball command has been inconsistent since then. So whatever the reason is for it, he's dealing with that. But in the bottom of the 8th inning, Cardinals get him a couple of extra runs to play with to where, yeah, it was a little bit intense in the 9th inning when you had, I think, 1st and 3rd. You had batters reach base and get on against him. But Helsley was able to close the door. But because they scored 2 runs in the bottom of the 8th to kind of answer the run that Kittredge and JoJo combined to give up was impressive, and the way they did it was even more impressive. You get a Burleson double, his 2nd of the game, and then Contreras strikes out, so it's 2 outs. We do have a runner in scoring position, and it was Dylan Carlson pinch running for Alec Burleson at that point. Goldschmidt, clutch RBI hit down the left field line. Only gets to first base on it. Just it didn't get deep enough into the corner to get him a double out of it. But he steals second base. Cardinals continuing to exhibit good base running. And I think this was another example where they seemed to have the tell, whatever it was. Donovan took a base, Gorman took a base, Goldie took a base in this game. It's kind of like the Logan Webb game on Sunday where they stole 4 as a team. And it's not the guys you would be thinking it would be. Mason Wynn, nope, he wasn't stealing. Ciani, nope, he wasn't stealing. It was the guys that basically, I don't know if they're getting ignored by these pitchers, if that's the tell in and of itself, or what's going on there. But Gorman now up to 6 steals on the season. Goldie, he used to do this a lot more, especially when he was with Arizona. Had a 30 stolen base season at least once. But Goldie takes one, and the one that he took there in the 8th was critical because Donovan then now, the RBI king, he leads the Cardinals in RBIs. He's got 40 of them this season. He drives one in because Goldie was able to steal that bag and basically catch the Braves napping a little bit. So that ends up turning into insurance as well. The Cardinals are doing so many things right now, and it gets you a little bit excited for what could be the case when the offense really starts to more consistently put it together. Because we're talking about a really nicely played game tonight by the Cardinals in which they only scored 4 runs, right? And if not for that high-quality at-bat after at-bat that they put together in the bottom of the 8th, you only score maybe 2, which even still could have been enough because of the great pitching performance that you got from Liberatore, and then the bullpen did enough. But they're doing these things right now and winning these games, and 3 games above 500, whereas pretty recently they weren't. They're doing these things without their best offense. I'm not talking about the injuries per se, although that's part of it. You get Newt back, you get Edmund back. I think it's a better lineup offensively. But I just mean in general, even the guys that are in the lineup right now, I would still look at a number of them and say, okay, Contreras probably below 887 for the OPS by the end of the year. Like, I think he'll come down a little bit compared to even where he is at this point. But Goldie's 665. I'm still taking the over. Arenado at 674. Call me a fool. I'll still take the over. I just have to expect that he'll find it. Gorman, 682. I'm taking the over on that one too. He might not be robust. It might be more like 710, 720, but I'll still take the over because that's almost a free square if he finds a way to hit some bombs again. So you just look at the key contributors that now you're talking about guys that are batting 5th, 7th, 6th in the lineup. Goldie was the cleanup man for game 2 tonight. Donovan's looking pretty good in that number 5 spot. But a number of the guys that you thought would be your best hitters at the beginning of the year, Goldie, Arenado, Gorman, all hitting in the OPS range of 600 right now, and I'm taking the over on all of them for the season. So there's this notion, and maybe that's foolish. You can tell me in the comments that I'm dumb. That's fine. But there's this notion that I feel like we may still have not seen the best of this Cardinals offense. Even if we have seen the best of it, this is a team that can scratch and claw its way to 83 wins or so, and maybe that's enough. Like, that's the pace. They're on 84, whatever win pace they're on right now. But if they get even better offensively and John Mozeliak does his job and adds whatever it is that they need, I'd still say, hey, it's looking great. Libby was great. You're feeling better about Lynn and Palante. You still need to aggressively target and see if you can't add a difference maker at the rotation to add as like a number 2. And if not, you certainly can always use relief help. Right-handed relief help in particular, some more setup guys. Because again, if I look at Roycroft versus Gallegos, I'd rather have Roycroft on the team. But tomorrow I think Gio is going to be there and Roycroft is not. So there are still margins of the roster and the bullpen and things like that you can look to edit. And I think John Mozeliak should be looking to do that. But man, if this Cardinal offense gets going to a degree that we haven't really seen consistently, just think about what the record could look like, because they've been basically the best team in baseball over the past month and a half or whatever it's been. The stat obviously gets updated every day, but since about Mother's Day, I mean, this Cardinals team has really been on one. So, it's just a question of, all right, this might even be enough, but if not, how much better could it get if the offense actually clicks in? On Mother's Day, they were 16-24, I believe. Let me advance the calendar by one day. Yeah, 16-24, 8 games below. I'm not sure if that was their low watermark on the season or if that came more recently. But if you advance things to today, they're 3 games above, so they've been playing plus 11 baseball the past month and a half. The past month plus 15 days. That's one of the best marks in baseball, if not the best. I don't know how to exactly sort that out and find that data, but they've been very good, and I still would say that their offense has another gear yet to find. So let me know what you think, Cardinals fans. Are you more optimistic now about the way things are going, and how do you handle Libby? What do you do? It's kind of a brain buster at this point, but I'd give him another look at the rotation because he was just that good. I don't think you can replicate that upside with what he gave on Wednesday. That's going to do it, though, for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace!